I'm Evan Tran, 33, a former black sheep turned university lecturer. The bleachers were already overflowing by the time I arrived at the campus stadium. Rows upon rows of folding chairs shimmered in the June heat, each seat filled with excited families waving homemade signs, cheap floral leis, and wrinkled programs flapping like fans in their hands. The speakers on the poles squealed with feedback as a student volunteer adjusted the mic for the 5th time. I stood there, alone, at the edge of the cordoned-off family-only section, holding a slim envelope in one hand and my suit jacket in the other. The usher didn't glance twice at me. A younger cousin, Harper, caught sight of me from 4 rows in and gave a quick wave more out of obligation than warmth. Behind her, Aunt Mai leaned toward another aunt, whispering something while nodding in my direction. They both looked, then quickly looked away. I took a breath and walked forward. "Excuse me, I'm with the Tran family," I said to the young woman in a lanyard. She glanced down at her clipboard. "Name Evan Tran." She scanned, frowned slightly. "Sorry, not on the list. This section's reserved." "I know. I'm here for Daniel Tran." "His cousin." She shook her head, already turning to the next person. "You'll have to sit with general guests, section D or E." I stood there, swallowing the sting, but nodded politely. "Thanks." As I backed away, I could still hear the words. "Didn't he drop out?" "No. I think he failed out. Remember that year he disappeared? Someone said he was working at a gas station in Modesto." Their whispers dripped down the bleachers like cold rain, settling on my skin. I walked down the aisle past them all, ignoring the curious glances, the mouths half smiling, half sneering. The kids didn't recognize me. The adults only remembered the version of me they froze in time 10 years ago, skinny, anxious, unemployed. I took a seat in the back row of Section D, on a plastic folding chair so hot it burned through my slacks. From here, Daniel was just a blue cap in a sea of identical graduates. His parents, my uncle and aunt, sat right at the front, beaming like they'd delivered him into greatness with their own hands. I should have left. I could have, but instead, I reached into the envelope I'd brought and touched the edges of the navy velvet fabric folded inside. I waited. The ceremony began. National anthem, speeches, cheerfully awkward valedictorian jokes. When Daniel's name was called, the crowd erupted. Cameras flashed. Aunt Mai burst into tears, clapping with both hands and shouting, "That's my boy," like she was the one graduating. Then came the moment. "Now, before we proceed," the dean said, tapping the mic, "we have a surprise honor to bestow." The murmuring began. Heads turned. Even Daniel looked confused. The dean stepped down from the podium. "Would Mr. Evan Tran please come to the stage?" I froze. For a moment, no one moved. Then the dean's eyes found mine, sharp, kind, expectant. Slowly, I stood. The crowd was dead quiet. I walked down the aisle like a ghost rising from the grave. Each step toward the stage peeled back a decade of misunderstanding. When I reached him, the dean extended the robe, a navy blue faculty robe, embroidered at the collar. He didn't explain. He didn't have to. Behind me, the audience held their breath. If you've ever been through something like this where your own family believed the worst about you, drop a comment or let me know where you're watching from. Hit like or subscribe if family drama ever made you feel invisible too. I took the robe. The crowd was silent. They saw me. I stood on that stage for no more than 30 seconds, but it felt like I'd entered a different lifetime. The robe weighed heavier than it looked, thick with ceremonial fabric, stitched edges pressing into my neck. My hands trembled as I slid my arms through the sleeves. My heartbeat thrummed in my ears. But outwardly, I moved with slow, deliberate control. The dean patted my back lightly, leaned in just enough so only I could hear. "Welcome back, Professor Tran." "Professor." The last time someone in my family said my name, it was followed by wasted potential. Applause finally broke the silence, a few hesitant claps, scattered and uncertain. Then someone cheered, probably a student who had no idea who I was. Then more claps, a ripple through the stadium. I caught Daniel's face in the crowd. His eyebrows were raised, eyes locked on me, mouth slightly parted like he was watching a stranger step out of his own memory. When I stepped off the stage, I didn't return to Section D. I was quietly ushered behind the curtain, toward the faculty seating area near the stage. I sat among people I knew, some former professors, now colleagues. One of them smiled and gave me a subtle nod. I didn't smile back. I couldn't. All I could think about was the moment 10 years ago when I packed up my dorm room in shame and silence. The past didn't just evaporate because the robe was handed to me. After the ceremony, I didn't expect anyone to say anything. But as I moved through the lawn outside the stadium, trying to slip out unnoticed, I heard my name. Evan. It was Aunt Mai. She approached with Daniel beside her, her high heels sinking into the soft grass. She looked at the robe, then back at me. Her smile stuck in a strange place between pride and confusion. "Were you just honored, or is that I teach here now?" I said softly. "Full-time faculty. Started this semester." There was a beat. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. Daniel glanced at her, then back at me. "Wait. Seriously, I teach creative writing and contemporary literature. I'm co-leading a research fellowship too." Daniel's face lit up. That's really cool." I didn't know. "No one knew," I said. I looked directly at Aunt Mai. I didn't really tell anyone. She gave a small, breathy laugh and waved her hand, like brushing away a mosquito. "Well, you know how the family talks. We all just assumed you'd gone another path. You were always the dreamy one." Dreamy. That was the word she used at every family dinner when I was a kid. When I wanted to write instead of help in the kitchen. When I brought a notebook instead of basketball shoes to the park. Daniel was still smiling. "I mean, that's wild. We always thought you..." He stopped himself. "So you're here all the time?" "Every week," I said. "Office in Building 8. His smile softened. "Cool. Maybe I'll drop by sometime." Aunt Mai adjusted the strap of her purse and glanced over her shoulder. "Well, we should get going. There's a dinner at the house later. You're welcome to join." It sounded like an afterthought, like an extra biscuit offered to a guest already on the way out. I nodded slowly. "Thanks. I'll think about it." They left. I stood there alone again. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the quad. My fingers brushed against the inside of the robe, where my ID badge hung from a hidden clip. "Hey." The voice behind me was unexpected. It was my former advisor, Dr. Langford, short, graying, stern. He never gave compliments easily. "You handled that well," he said. "Crowd recognition's a strange thing, isn't it?" I nodded. "More than strange." He looked me over. "You were one of the best I ever taught, but you were hurting. I could tell. Even back then. I thought I'd failed you." "You never failed me," he said. "You just needed time, and no one gave it to you." We stood in silence for a few seconds. "I'm glad you came back," he said. Then he walked away, his briefcase swinging like a metronome. I didn't go to the dinner. Instead, I walked across campus. The familiar paths, the library steps, the wooden benches under the sycamore trees. Nothing had changed, but I had. 10 years ago, I'd dropped out 2 semesters shy of graduation. A breakdown. They called it panic attacks, insomnia, crippling self-doubt. I left without ceremony, without a word to anyone except the registrar. I lived in my car for 6 months. Then I moved to a small town, took night shifts at a diner, wrote poetry in a spiral notebook between customers. I didn't try to publish. I didn't tell anyone. When I applied for a remote community college degree, I used a different name. My middle name. That's how deep the shame ran. I clawed my way back. Silently. Bachelor's. Then a low residency MFA. I worked in bookstores, in after-school programs, even in construction for a year. I wrote every night. Eventually, one of my short stories was published, then another, then a fellowship, then a call from a university I never thought would look at me twice. But none of that mattered to my family, because I'd left. And in their world, leaving meant failure. Back in my apartment that night, I hung the faculty robe on the back of my chair. I didn't take photos. I didn't post about it. I sat in silence, watching it sway gently in the breeze from the cracked window. The robe didn't change who I was, but it gave me a language to speak in the world that once tried to erase me. The next morning, my inbox was flooded with unread messages. Most were routine student drafts, faculty reminders, a departmental notice about a printer outage. But 3 stood out, all from family. The first was a short email from Uncle Min, Daniel's father. "Hi, Evan. Surprised us all yesterday. Didn't know you were back at the university. That's impressive. Hope we didn't offend you at the ceremony. We're proud of you. Min. Proud of me." He hadn't used that phrase since I was 12 and won the school spelling bee. The second email was from my cousin Stephanie. "Evan, I had no idea you were teaching. You're so low-key, lol. Why didn't you say anything? Aunt Mai was freaking out last night. You totally made her look bad, ha ha ha. Hope you're doing well. Let's catch up sometime. Maybe brunch." The tone made me wince, like my presence had been some hilarious twist in their family soap opera. And the third was from my mother. "I saw the pictures your aunt posted. I knew you would find your way back. Your father would have been proud. Love." Mom. That one hit hardest. My father had died the year I left college, a quiet heart attack in the middle of a humid California night. He'd tried so hard to understand me, even when the rest of them rolled their eyes. He used to sit beside me while I wrote, nodding silently, asking now and then, "Do the words ever scare you?" They did. They still do. I didn't reply to any of the messages. I couldn't. Not yet. Instead, I pulled out an old box from under my bed. It was plain, taped up haphazardly, still dusty from 3 apartments ago. Inside were dozens of composition notebooks, some leather-bound journals, and a few manila folders of rejection letters. I picked one at random, July 2016. Fresno. Inside were pages scribbled during overnight shifts. Poems about cracked diner counters, about men who ordered black coffee and stared into the dark like it might blink back. One page near the back had a title scrawled in all caps. Invisible at the table, I read the first stanza. "They pass the rice around me, but not to me. My bowl stays dry, my voice stays quiet and still. They talk like I'm not here. Maybe I'm not." That poem had never seen daylight. No one had read it but me. Until that afternoon, because that day, I decided to share it with my students. I walked into my 2 p.m. creative writing seminar with the poem in hand. They were sprawled across chairs in the small seminar room, some slouched, some scribbling already. The whiteboard still covered in fragments from our last session. I didn't announce anything. I just passed out copies. "Today we're reading something unpublished." I said, "It's called Invisible at the Table," written in 2016. The author was working nights at a diner back then. I didn't tell them it was mine. I waited while they read. Silence filled the room. Some students furrowed their brows. Others nodded slowly. A few looked up at me with something soft in their eyes. Recognition. Maybe. One girl near the back whispered, "Damn." I asked them what they saw. "Displacement," said one. "Like, you're physically present but emotionally absent." "It felt like the speaker was shrinking," said another. "Like the table got bigger and they just faded." Someone added, "It's about more than food. It's about being seen." I nodded. "Exactly. Later." As class ended, one student lingered, a quiet kid named Miguel who barely spoke most days. He waited until everyone else left, then approached me, clutching his binder. I like that poem," he said. "It reminded me of family dinners. Mine. I always get stuck at the kids' table even though I'm 20. I smiled. "Yeah, I used to get that too." He hesitated. "Did you write it?" I paused, then nodded. His face lit up with something like relief. "I thought so. It felt too real. Thanks for sharing that." He left. I stood alone in the classroom, surrounded by empty chairs, sunlight slanting through the blinds, and I thought maybe this is the only table I ever needed. That night, I finally answered one message. Not Aunt Mai, not Stephanie, not Uncle Min. My mother. "Hi, Mom. Thanks for the note. I didn't tell anyone because I wasn't sure it would last. I think I needed to earn it quietly. I still think about Dad every time I teach. Love." "Evan," she responded almost immediately. "You earned it the day you kept going." It was the simplest line, but it unknotted something I'd been carrying for years. I didn't cry, but I sat in that quiet space for a long time, letting it hold me. The rest of the week passed in a haze, students turning in midterm drafts, office hours full of awkward confessions and anxious revisions. I loved it, not because they saw me as some authority, but because they came in with their chaos and let me sit with them in it. One afternoon, I passed Daniel in the student center. He was with a group of friends, laughing, holding a smoothie, looking exactly like a kid who had the whole world ahead of him. He saw me, and instead of avoiding eye contact like most cousins would, he lifted his hand and waved. Then he called out, "Hey, Professor." His friends turned to stare. I smiled. "Hey, Daniel. We didn't need more than that." He didn't owe me an apology. I didn't need one. Somewhere between being ignored in the bleachers and standing at the front of a classroom, I'd stopped needing their permission to matter. The weekend after the graduation, I found myself back at the small Vietnamese cafe I used to visit as a student, Hoang Tra on Eucalyptus Avenue. It hadn't changed. The same faded jade-green walls, the handwritten cash-only sign near the register, the ceiling fan that creaked like it had arthritis. Back then, I'd sit in the corner with a used paperback and a banh mi I could barely afford. Now, I carried a worn leather satchel with student essays inside and could afford anything on the menu. Still, I ordered the same thing, egg banh mi, no cilantro, and iced coffee with condensed milk. As I waited, I watched the tables fill. Mostly students, some old regulars. 2 girls nearby were editing photos on a laptop. A man in a security uniform slurped pho while scrolling his phone. I liked this place because no one cared who I was. I wasn't a disappointment. I wasn't a surprise. I was just another person holding a sandwich. I sat down by the window and pulled out a stack of short stories from my advanced class. Red ink already bled through a few pages, habitual corrections, notes, encouragement. Halfway through the pile, I spotted a familiar name, Stephanie Tran. I blinked. For a second, I thought my cousin had submitted a story under a pseudonym, but no. This Stephanie was a sophomore in the business program, Her story was clumsy but honest. It was about a girl who never learned how to cry, even when her father left. I wrote on the last page, "You don't need perfect grammar to tell the truth. Don't stop." I meant it. The cafe door jingled open. I looked up and froze. Aunt Mai. She didn't see me at first. She was with another woman, her church friend. I guessed. They ordered pho and found a table near the register. I considered leaving, but something in me didn't want to. Not anymore. A few minutes passed before she noticed me. Her gaze lingered a second too long before she stood and walked over. "Evan," she said, surprised but not entirely pleased. "Aunt Mai." I smiled politely. "Didn't expect to see you here." She tilted her head. "I thought you lived in San Jose. I moved back last year. Took the faculty job in January." Yes, of course." She glanced down at the papers on my table. Grading stories. Final projects. She didn't sit, just hovered there. The smell of pho broth clung to her cardigan. "You know, your uncle was really impressed. Min said you carried yourself with such poise. Very professional. Thank you." She hesitated. "We were just surprised. I think we assumed you left school for good." "I did. For a while. But you came back." "I came back on my own terms." There was a beat of silence. She looked like she wanted to say something but couldn't find the language for it. "Well," she said, "it's good to see you doing well. You looked very confident on stage." I nodded. I was terrified. She laughed lightly, not expecting the honesty. Then, almost without thinking, she reached out and touched the edge of my sleeve. "That robe suits you. Makes you look older." "Maybe I am older," I said. She smiled. For once, it wasn't strained, just tired. "I should get back to my friend," she said. "Take care. Evan. You too." She walked away. It wasn't reconciliation, but it was a beginning. After lunch, I walked back through campus. The breeze carried the scent of cut grass and the sound of someone playing guitar badly on the quad. I paused at the English department building and stood in front of the bulletin board. There it was. My name, Evan Tran, lecturer, creative writing and contemporary literature. Tacked just beneath it was a flyer for my summer workshop. A student had drawn a cartoon version of me in the corner, big glasses, long coat, coffee cup in hand. I laughed. I never saw myself that way. But maybe they did. That night, I called my mother. She picked up on the first ring. "Kana, hi Mom. Are you okay?" I think so." She paused. "You sounded sad in your email." I didn't want to push. "I've just been thinking a lot. About your dad." "Yeah. About everything." She sighed. I could hear her turn the volume down on her favorite soap opera. "You know," she said softly, "when you left school, your father didn't say anything bad. Not once. He just kept checking the mail. Every day. He'd ask if maybe you sent a postcard." My throat tightened. "I never knew that." I said, "He didn't want you to think we gave up on you, even when your uncles did." There was a long silence between us. "I'm proud of you, Evan," she said. "Not because you teach, but because you stayed kind. That was the part no one ever saw. Not the family, not the professors, not the whispers at graduation. When you rebuild yourself, no one claps for the days you didn't quit. They only cheer when you return shiny and unrecognizable. But the real work happens in the quiet of diners at midnight, of libraries at closing time, of silence after the rejection letters pile up. The robe didn't erase the shame. It just proved I didn't drown in it. That weekend, I visited my father's grave. I hadn't been in years. The headstone was still modest gray granite, clean edges, his name etched in quiet dignity. I sat beside it with my back to the sun and read him a story, one I'd written during the darkest winter of my life. It was about a boy who spoke too softly for his family to hear, so he learned to write louder than they could shout. I think he would have liked that. As I packed up to leave, I placed a folded note on the stone. I didn't give up, Dad, even when they said I did. Love, Evan. I walked back to the car with the wind at my back. Not alone, not forgotten, just returning. Summer term began quietly. The campus thinned out, the usual noise of undergrads replaced by the hush of intensive workshops, visiting scholars, and students who either couldn't go home or didn't want to. I preferred it this way. Fewer eyes, fewer questions. I taught 2 back-to-back seminars in a small room with creaky windows and chairs that scraped too loudly against the linoleum floor. There were only 12 students in each class, and I learned all their names by the end of the first week. On Tuesday, one of them, Nadia, an architecture major with ink-stained fingertips, asked me during a break, "Do your family read your work?" I blinked, caught off guard. "Sometimes," I said, "but mostly, they don't know what I'm really saying." She smiled gently. "I think mine would panic if they read mine. My dad still thinks I'm writing essays about bridges." We laughed. Moments like that made teaching feel like conversation rather than instruction, a place where honesty wasn't a weakness. One afternoon, I gave them a prompt. Write about the room you've never been allowed to enter. Some wrote about real places, locked bedrooms, grandfather's basements, mother's offices. Others wrote about metaphorical rooms, ambition, grief, identity. And one, surprisingly, wrote about me. It was Daniel. I recognized his handwriting before I saw the name. He wasn't in my class, but he'd emailed me a week before asking if I'd look at a piece he didn't feel comfortable submitting to his professor. It was titled, "My Cousin Evan's Room." I held it in my hands, stunned. The story was fictionalized but familiar. A young boy grows up hearing about his mysterious cousin who vanished after a family scandal. The boy hears whispers: failed college, depression, shame, but never the full truth. One day, the cousin reappears at a graduation, not in a cap, but in a robe, and the boy realizes that the story wasn't about failure, it was about survival. The final lines hit me like a soft blow to the chest. I never asked what happened to him because I thought I knew. I didn't. And now I wonder how many stories we kill by pretending they ended before they began. I stared at the page for a long time. Then I picked up a pen and wrote, "You didn't just open the door. You lit a lamp inside it. Keep writing." The next day, I bumped into him on campus near the library. He grinned, sheepish. "Did you hate it?" "No," I said. "I didn't hate it. I felt it." He relaxed, nodding slowly. "I didn't want to guess at your story. I just wanted to say I was sorry for not asking sooner. You didn't owe me that," I said. "But I do," he replied. "We all do. The way the family talks about people, it's like their version becomes law." "Yeah," I said. "And some laws are meant to be broken." He chuckled. "You sound like a real professor now." "I guess I am." After he left, I sat down on a bench in the quad and let myself exhale. Not out of pride, out of release. The hardest part wasn't being forgotten. It was learning how to show up again fully, without bitterness, without needing anyone to clap. A few days later, I received an invitation in my mailbox. Handwritten, elegant script. Tran family mid-autumn dinner. Saturday, 7 p.m. Backyard at Uncle Bow's. Bring a dish. Bring a story. I hadn't been invited to one of these in 8 years. Not since the year they voted on who would inherit Grandma's jade jewelry, even though she wasn't dead yet. I sat with the card for an hour before I decided to go. Not for them, for me. When I arrived, the house was already lit up. Paper lanterns strung across the patio, bamboo mats laid out under the peach trees, and a long folding table covered in rice dishes, grilled meats, and mooncakes wrapped in crinkled gold paper. The air was thick with lemongrass and laughter. Someone spotted me at the gate. Evan's here. The sound rippled through the crowd like a dropped plate. Heads turned. Conversations paused. A few kids ran past me to the dessert table. Aunt Mai stood by the grill. She gave a small, uncertain wave. I waved back. I placed my dish spring rolls, freshly made next to a tray of roast duck, and looked around for somewhere to stand. That's when Stephanie approached. "You actually came?" she said, eyes wide. "You invited me? Technically, Uncle Bao invited you. But yeah, this is wild. Everyone's been talking about you since graduation. You're like family folklore now. Glad to finally be mythologized." She laughed. "Come sit. The kids want to hear about the time you left college to join a poetry cult or whatever." I followed her to the low mats. Children stared up at me with sticky fingers and open mouths. "Is it true you dropped out to become a monk?" one asked. "No," I said. "But I did once write a poem so sad, a whole cafe went silent." They gasped. I sat down. Not as a cautionary tale, not as a success story, just as me. Uncle Min came by with a tray of beers. He handed me one wordlessly. We clinked bottles. That night, I told a story about a boy who lost his way, about how quiet can be louder than shouting, about how families forget that some of their best chapters are still being written off stage, in silence, by those they stopped believing in. The kids listened like it was a campfire story. The adults stayed quiet, not embarrassed, not amazed, just aware. Later, when the moon was high and the younger cousins had fallen asleep on lawn chairs, Aunt Mai brought over a small plate of sliced dragon fruit. She sat beside me. "I told your mother you'd come." "Oh, she said you'd be gracious about it." I told her you'd be distant." "Well," I said, "we were both right." She smiled faintly. "You know, I always thought I understood success. It looked like degrees and houses and big weddings. And now I think it looks like survival, like showing up when you have every reason not to." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The night wrapped itself around us in soft wind and quiet reconciliation. No speeches, no apologies, just the sound of chopsticks tapping plates and the rustle of paper lanterns in the breeze. And for the first time in years, I felt like I belonged at the table, not because I proved them wrong, but because I stopped needing to. In the weeks that followed, the invitations didn't stop. Not formal ones, just texts, casual check-ins, Instagram tags. A photo of a family picnic where someone commented, "Wish Evan was here." A cousin asking if I could help with their personal statement. Aunt Mai forwarding me a link to a short story contest you might like. It was strange. Not because they were reaching out, because they were doing it without pretending nothing had happened. The silence between us had always been the unspoken contract. You fall behind, you disappear, you rise again, and maybe they let you back in. But no one names the absence. Now they were naming it. Carefully, awkwardly, like learning a new language. One Sunday afternoon, I was on campus watering the neglected potted plants outside my office when I heard footsteps. Busy, I looked up. It was Daniel. He was wearing a hoodie and holding a brown paper bag. Thought I'd stop by. I stepped aside. "You're lucky these plants are still alive. I think the spider plant is plotting a rebellion." He smiled and followed me inside. He glanced around the office books stacked unevenly on the floor, a corkboard filled with sticky notes and torn-out lines from student work. A framed quote above my desk that read, "Be ruthless with your art, gentle with yourself." He handed me the bag. "Ban Quan," he said. "Mom made extra." I sat down, peeling the paper open. The smell hit me instantly. Warm rice rolls, crispy shallots, the scent of home. We ate in silence for a while. Then he said, "So, can I ask you something?" I nodded. "Did it hurt? Leaving school like that?" I looked at him, surprised by the bluntness. "Yes," I said. More than I could explain back then. He swallowed. "I remember hearing stuff. That you failed out. That you were depressed. One time Uncle Bao said you'd joined a commune." I raised an eyebrow. "That one's new." Daniel laughed, but then grew quiet. I think I believed it. Not out of malice, just, it was easier than wondering what really happened. "I get that," I said. "Honestly, part of me wanted to disappear completely, not just from school, from them, from myself." "What stopped you?" I thought about it. Really thought. "Words," I said. "Writing. Even when I hated myself, I couldn't stop telling stories. I didn't know if they were good. I just knew they were mine. And that made surviving feel like it had purpose." Daniel leaned back in the chair, his gaze drifting toward the window. "I want that," he said softly. "Not the teaching job, not the robe. Just something that's mine. You'll find it," I said. "But it won't arrive all at once. It'll show up in fragments. And sometimes, it won't even look like a gift." He nodded slowly. "I think that's already started." As he stood to leave, he paused at the door. "Hey, Evan." "Yeah. Thanks for staying, even when none of us really saw you. You see me now," I said. "That's enough." After he left, I sat in my office a while longer, listening to the creak of the old radiator, the occasional burst of laughter from the courtyard. I opened my notebook and wrote, "Sometimes the door you need to walk through is the one they forgot they locked behind you." That night, I received a voicemail from my mother. "Kana, your aunt called. Said you've been seeing the family more. I'm happy. You always belong to them, even if they forgot for a while. Don't let it harden your heart, Evan. Just let it shape your voice." I listened to it 3 times. Then I called her back. "Hi, Mom. You sound tired." "I am, but not in a bad way." She paused. "I was going through your father's things. I found an envelope he labeled with your name." I held my breath. "Inside," she continued, "was a poem, written in his handwriting, but I'm sure the words were yours. It was about a boy sitting under a streetlight, waiting to be picked up. The last line was, 'Maybe if I'm quiet enough, the world will call my name.'" My throat closed. "I remember that one." I whispered. "I left it in the garage when I was 16. He kept it, all these years." I didn't know what to say. "He never stopped waiting for your name to be called," she added. When we hung up, I cried, quietly, fully, without shame. It wasn't grief anymore, it was recognition. Later that week, I was asked to speak at a new faculty orientation panel. Nothing major, just a short talk about my teaching approach and what it meant to work with students from non-traditional backgrounds. I almost said no, but then I thought of that poem under the streetlight, so I said yes. When the day came, I stood at the front of the auditorium, the same one where I'd once received a student conduct warning for skipping finals. There were about 50 people in the crowd. Some looked polished, others nervous. A few were older than me. I told them my story. Not the glossy version, the true one. I told them about failure, about shame, about how being underestimated can either destroy you or turn you into something no one expected. I ended with this. Students come to us not always believing they belong, but sometimes, so do faculty. And the greatest thing we can offer each other isn't brilliance, it's space. Space to show up unsure, to rewrite ourselves, to be seen without needing to be explained. No one clapped at first. Then they did. But I wasn't waiting for that anymore. As I gathered my notes, one woman approached me. I dropped out twice before I finished my PhD. She said, "Thank you for saying it out loud." I smiled. Saying it out loud is how we heal it. She nodded and walked away. That night, I passed the stadium on my way home. It was empty now, just rows of metal seats glowing under the orange streetlights. I climbed halfway up and sat alone, staring at the stage where I'd once been called forward. No crowd, no family, just me. I whispered my own name into the night air. And for once, it didn't echo back in loneliness. It returned in stillness. And in stillness, I finally felt whole. Mid-September brought rain. Not the kind that rushes or crashes, but the slow, patient kind that seeps into everything, a drizzle that lingered like a thought you couldn't shake. Campus quieted. Students showed up to class with damp sleeves and steaming coffee, their eyes rimmed with sleep. The trees dropped leaves in yellow spirals. I always love this time of year. It made things feel softer, easier to hold, but it also brought memory. Rain reminded me of the week I left. I'd stuffed my life into 2 duffel bags and vanished in the dark, too ashamed to ask anyone for help. I remember standing outside the bus station, shivering under the overhang, soaked to the bone. No umbrella, just a notebook zipped into my hoodie pocket. I had one story in it. That was all. Now I carried books, syllabi, lunch packed in Tupperware. One afternoon, as I stood under the faculty lounge's tin awning watching the drizzle, a voice beside me said, "Do you ever miss the version of you that didn't know what was coming?" I turned. It was Dr. Patel, a new hire in sociology. We'd spoken a few times, mostly passing comments, compliments on coffee mugs or classroom playlists. She sipped from her thermos. "Sorry, that was probably too philosophical for a Tuesday." I shook my head. "No, it's a good question." I thought about it. "I think I miss his hunger," I said, the way he believed writing could fix everything, even if he had no proof. "I don't miss the loneliness, but I miss how raw it all felt." She nodded. "I get that." Before I finished my doctorate, I lived out of my car for a while. Nobody believed I'd make it past my first semester. We stood in silence, 2 professors in soaked shoes, sharing the unspoken truth that some of us don't come from places that expect survival, let alone success. She looked at me again. "You're kind of a mystery on campus. You know, the students talk about your class like it's therapy with homework." I laughed. "I hope that's a compliment." "It is." That night, I stayed on campus late, not grading, not planning, just sitting in the empty seminar room. Lights dimmed, listening to the rain. I opened my notebook and began writing something new. Not a story, not an essay. Just this: forgiveness doesn't always come as an apology. Sometimes it arrives quietly, when no one's looking, with a cup of tea, and the courage to stay. I didn't know who it was for. Myself, maybe, or my mother, or even Aunt Mai. But I kept going. 3 days later, during my office hours, I heard a knock I wasn't expecting. "Hey, stranger." Stephanie, my cousin. She held a tote bag and a coffee cup with my name scrawled on it in Sharpie. I was nearby, she said, and figured it was time. Time for what? For the world's most awkward family check-in. I raised an eyebrow. "Come in." She sat down across from my desk and looked around. This is cozy. Smells like books and overachievement. I smirked. What's going on? Steph. She leaned forward. Okay. So I've been thinking about all of it. About you. About what we all said. Or didn't say. And I wanted to say this in person. I'm sorry. I looked at her, caught off guard. I wasn't cruel. She continued. But I wasn't kind either. I laughed at the jokes. I nodded when people dismissed you. And when you came back? I acted like it was a surprise instead of an overdue correction. I didn't speak. Not yet. I just didn't know what to do with the version of you that didn't need our approval. She said. You seemed too calm. Like we didn't matter anymore. And that scared me. I exhaled. You mattered. You always did. I just stopped waiting for you to say it back. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't let them fall. I brought something, she said, pulling a small, wrinkled paper out of her tote. It was an old photo. Me and her, sitting on the porch of Grandma's house, both barefoot, holding popsicles. Mom was going to throw this out, she said. I grabbed it. I smiled at the picture. I was maybe 12. She looked about 9, our faces full of something that hadn't yet been touched by shame. I remember that day, I said. It was too hot for anything but sitting still. We built a story about a secret tunnel under the garden, and I told you I'd write a book about it one day. She nodded, still waiting. I'll get to it. She smiled and stood up. I'm glad you came back. Not for them, for you. But I think we're lucky to have another chance. Me too. After she left, I pinned the photo to the corkboard above my desk, right next to the quote about being gentle with yourself. Later that week, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address. Just my name, printed neatly. Inside was a single sheet of paper, thick and textured, typed in bold at the top. Fall guest speaker, keynote the stories we hide from ourselves, and beneath it, Evan Tran. Lecturer, invited speaker. The seal at the bottom was from the university. I sat with it for a long time. Not because I was nervous, because I knew this time, when I stood in front of that podium, I wouldn't be speaking for them. I'd be speaking for the version of me that once wrote poems under parking lot lights. The version of me who flinched every time someone said, "What happened to Evan?" The version of me who never stopped writing, even when no one was reading. I spent the weekend drafting the speech. Not a lecture, not an essay, just a story. Mine. I didn't ask for approval. I didn't need feedback. And when the night of the event arrived, I wore the robe again. But this time, I walked through the back door. Not as a surprise, as someone who belonged. The auditorium was quieter than usual that night. A low hum of whispers, the occasional cough, the rustle of programs being folded and unfolded again. Most of the seats were filled, but no one was fidgeting. They were waiting. I stood backstage, hands in the pockets of my robe. My heart was steady. Not because I wasn't nervous, but because I finally understood that nerves didn't mean weakness. They meant presence. Someone from the student committee peeked behind the curtain. "You ready, Mr. Tran?" "Yeah," I said. "Let's do it." The student nodded and disappeared. I heard them step to the mic. "Please welcome our keynote speaker tonight, Mr. Evan Tran." I stepped out to a modest wave of applause, not the thunderous kind, not polite and pitiful either, just steady, curious. I walked to the podium, adjusted the mic, and looked out. I saw a few familiar faces, Daniel in the third row, Stephanie beside him, trying not to look too emotional. Dr. Langford sat 2 rows behind, arms crossed, but a faint smile on his face. My mother, near the aisle, her hands folded in her lap, and a dozen students who had no idea what I'd lived through, just that I taught writing and sometimes let the class out 10 minutes early. I took a breath. Before I begin, I said, I want to tell you that I almost didn't accept this invitation. Laughter, small, knowing. Not because I don't appreciate it, but because, for a long time, I didn't believe I had anything to say that people wanted to hear. You see, I'm not just an alum of this university. I'm also a dropout. Or at least, I was. Now the room was silent. I left this campus over a decade ago with no degree, no job, no plan. And worse, I left without saying goodbye. I left carrying a story I believed no one wanted to hear. I leaned slightly closer to the mic. But the truth is, sometimes the most important story isn't the one everyone claps for. Sometimes, it's the one you write in silence, the one you rewrite over years of loneliness, failure, and the quiet belief that maybe, just maybe, it still matters. A pause. I used to believe survival was the absence of failure. Now I know survival is learning how to move through failure without letting it change your name. I scanned the crowd. My name is Evan Tran. I'm a teacher, a writer, and for a long time, I was the boy no one called on, the cousin people whispered about, the student who vanished between semesters. I thought that disqualified me from ever standing here. But I was wrong. I turned a page of my notes. Though I didn't really need them. People talk about redemption like it's some big, glowing moment. Like a prize. But redemption, in my experience, is quieter. It sounds like a cousin's text message, like a mother's voicemail, like the soft creak of a faculty office door you never thought you'd open again. A few nods in the crowd. I don't tell this story so you'll admire me. I tell it so you'll remember someone in your life who disappeared, who faltered, who walked out of the picture too early. Someone you gave up on, or forgot about, or wrote off too soon. Maybe they're not lost. Maybe they're just still writing. I paused, then looked directly at my mother. My father passed away not long after I left school. He never saw me wear this robe, but he kept a poem I wrote when I was 16, one that ended with the line, "Maybe if I'm quiet enough, the world will call my name." Well, I'm not quiet anymore, and I'm not waiting for anyone to call me. I've learned to say my own name, loudly, clearly, with pride, applause, not wild, just sincere, enough to shake something loose in my chest. I closed with one last thought. Some stories take time. Some don't fit inside resumes or bios. Some require you to return, not to prove anything, but to finally recognize yourself. To every student, every teacher, every so-called failure who's still trying, this story is for you, and it's still being written. I stepped back from the mic, and for a moment, the entire auditorium stood still. Then the clapping began. I looked down at my hands. They weren't shaking. After the talk, people came up to me. Students, staff, even 2 janitors I'd nodded to for months but never spoken with. They said things like, "Thank you." That was real. I didn't know professors could feel like this too. My brother dropped out. I think I understand him better now. Even Dr. Patel stopped me on the way out. You gave them something more than inspiration tonight. You gave them permission. I didn't know what to say, so I said thank you. Outside. The rain had stopped. The sidewalks shimmered like sheets of glass under the lamplight. As I reached the parking lot, I heard footsteps behind me. Evan Stephanie. She was holding something in her hand. I almost forgot. She said, breathless, "This is for you." She handed me a manila envelope. I opened it and found a photo. The same one she'd shown me in my office. But now, it was framed. Beneath it, in delicate handwriting, a quote was written on the white mat. Some stories take longer to tell, but they're still worth hearing. I blinked. Swallowed. Thanks, I said. You were amazing up there. She replied. They finally saw what we missed. No, I said. I finally showed them what I stopped hiding. We stood there for a moment under the flickering parking light. Then she hugged me. Tight. I'm proud of you, she whispered. I'm proud of me too. She stepped back. I'll see you at the next family dinner. I think I'll bring the dessert, I said. She grinned. Just don't bake it yourself. We laughed. She left. I got in my car and sat still for a while. Not because I was sad. Not because I was overwhelmed. But because peace isn't loud. It's quiet. Like breath. Like finally walking through a door you once thought was locked forever. I drove home with the window cracked open. And the wind didn't bite anymore. It just carried the night. Soft. Honest. Like the ending to a chapter that didn't need a bow. Only truth. Only return.